Believers, let's imagine the following scenario. You have a family that's been brutally murdered by a psychopath. And this psychopath, he was bragging about how he slit the throats and all of that. So this man has been arrested and he is awaiting his trial. So now the victims, the family of the victims want to be left alone now because they need to grieve. Let's say the perpetrator gets life in prison. And now it's 20 years later. And people now begin to put the pictures of this psychopath all over the place. This man that murdered a family in a brutal way. The man became a hype. They began to put him on in advertisement, on clothes. What do you think is going to do to the relatives of the victims of that family? I mean, that family was killed. What about the relatives that are still alive? What are they going to say? They're going to be shocked. And if this happens in a country and foreign news agencies would see it and they would report it, what do you think the rest of the world is going to say? What? This psycho murdered a whole family, including children, and now they turned him into a hype? Making money off of that man's name? So actually they're making money off of the trauma of the victims. Everyone would think, come on now, you don't do such a thing. Benefiting from someone else's trauma. Or let's say now that there was this Nazi officer during the Second World War that killed a lot of folks. And now you have this German movement that praises men as a hero, openly. What do you think the Jewish community is going to do? They're going to file reports for anti-Semitism, saying that man in history, he killed over 3,000 Jews. And the descendants of those who survived are still carrying the collective trauma of it. And immediately the court would say that group needs to stop because you can't benefit from someone's trauma like this. Or let's go a bit smaller. What if you have a woman who chooses to get involved with a man and that man is known to be a child rapist? And she even brings him to the public park where there are a lot of children. What do you think people are going to do? They're going to arrest that man, but also going to arrest her, thinking you're endangering the community just to get your attention. People will call her for what she is, a malignant narcissist, and they will put her away. Rightfully so. But hold on. What I've seen in this world, until this George Floyd incident, is that when the victims were black people in general, people were kind of okay with benefiting from their trauma. What's that? When I found out that there were still statues of slave owners and people that were involved in the genocide of Africans during the slave trade, I was shocked that there were so many of those statues still out there. I know about King Leopold II of Belgium. I knew about that, but I was thinking, what? This ain't right. So, a people was subjected to genocide and to economic persecution and affliction for a long period of time, even after slavery was abolished. Till this day, that group of people is scapegoated, and you guys even honor the victimizers of that group. Those historical figures that were a big part of it. That's not correct. If it was the white Jewish community that had perpetrators in the past that contributed to their harm, and you would put their statues everywhere, it wouldn't happen. In East Asia, Japan is not even allowed to openly honor many of their World War II soldiers because of the atrocities they've committed against China and Korea and other places. If Japan does it, Japan's in trouble. So why is it that when it comes to black folk, for some reason people feel okay to allow it to happen? Until recently. Let me tell you why. When a group has been scapegoated for a long period of time, people get used to seeing that group as the one that's causing all the trouble. That's what a scapegoat is. A scapegoat is someone that's blamed for something that they're not responsible for. So a scapegoat is never allowed to remind people that he or she is a human and that they have words too. Because once they do that, others will reflect on themselves and realize, what type of monsters are we? People don't want to fix that about themselves. So they will come up with excuses why it's okay to victimize the victim. If those excuses are way out of line and the violence against the scapegoat is way too obvious, the public will wake up, the spell will be broken. And now people will feel embarrassed about themselves. They've allowed this to continue for so long. And then it will backfire. And that is what happened with this George Floyd situation. You know, this police brutality against blacks has been going on way before Trayvon Martin in 2012. At Trayvon Martin, it should have been stopped. It did not stop. It continued over and over again. And every time, even when there was evidence that the police officers were in the wrong, often they were not charged. And now you had George Floyd. He couldn't breathe. And they killed him. So now, you both had the corona thing going on, with all those lockdowns, and you had this. So, this incident was so obvious that worldwide people realize, come on, what is this? So you have a group of people in the United States that are entitled to harm? What is that? Because here's the thing, even if a criminal is guilty, you're not allowed to just victimize them. You're supposed to bring them in and let them await trial. That's how it goes in a justice system. So when the George Floyd thing happened, what happened is that many black people began to roll out evidence of all the other victims that have been killed by police brutality since Trayvon Martin, and the list is quite exhaustive. When they kept on publicizing all these facts and people were exposed to it, then people began to realize, hold on a minute. Then a lot of people became angry, they became upset. And when the public became upset, they had an outlet. And here's the thing, you already had the lockdowns of Corona that upset a lot of people. And now this George Floyd thing came, so people lost their mind. A lot of folks, not only blacks, you also had Mexicans, whites, a lot of folks went down the streets using this thing of George Floyd as an excuse to cause riots and all of that. And of course, yeah, you had Black Lives Matter, that group being active. I'm not saying you should endorse the group, but what they're saying is true. Black Lives Matter, just like white lives, just like all human lives matter. But the fact that you need to mention Black Lives Matter is because Black lives often don't matter in daily life. If you have 10 houses and one house is on fire, and attention goes to that one house is on fire, you're not going to say, why doesn't a house get so much attention? Our houses matter too. Nobody said that your house doesn't matter, but your house is not the one on fire, is it? Okay. So, then, what followed was that because a lot of people went out of line, a lot of people lost it, businesses were looted, all over the United States, also in the rest of the world, people revolted against it. Because here's the thing, when violence happens openly and people don't respond against it, they will feel guilty when they're at home. For example, if in public a father smacks a child very hard multiple times and everyone sits down, the next morning they will wake up and thinking, hold on a minute, a child was victimized by a grown man and we just sat there and allowed it to happen. How is this going to make them feel about themselves? They're going to be uncomfortable. So next time something happens and they open their mouth, people say, but hold on a minute, last time a child was victimized openly, you sat there and you enabled it, didn't you? So it can be used against them. So when violence happens openly, into their face, when it's too obvious, people tend to say, hold on. And that is what happened. And as a result, a lot of black folks got courage and they began to expose a lot of more bad stuff that were going on. And when people came in, yeah, but look at Chicago where a lot of black men kill one another. A lot of black folks said, listen, amongst all peoples, there are crazy ones that kill their own. Why is it that every time injustice against black people is mentioned, people say, yeah, but what about black on black crime? Where there are white Jews that kill white Jews. But when it comes to discussing the Holocaust or whatever, are we going to say, yeah, but what about those white Jews that killed white Jews? People say that's irrelevant. If there's an issue negative against those people, it shouldn't exist. It doesn't matter if they have self-destructive people amongst them. So blacks began to persist, and you know what? The situation embarrassed the world. It really did. It embarrassed people so much that many of them realized, you know what? If we continue to allow this to happen, our children, our grandchildren, and later generations are going to laugh at us and be embarrassed. And and even today, if you allow this to continue, people will lose trust in the authorities. They will lose trust in society. And once that happens, people will take matters in own hands. Things will get way out of line. So a lot of statues have been removed, a lot of labels and a lot have been changed, which is a good start. Because this is what happened to black folks throughout the centuries. The image of black people has been portrayed as negative, as beast-like, as inferior, as subhuman. And this imagery has been repeated over and over again. And blacks have not challenged it sufficiently. So because of that, worldwide, the image of the black man or black woman is that they are subhuman, and therefore it doesn't matter that much if you hurt them or harm them. That's the breaking down of the image of black people. So once you have this, then violating black people becomes the next step. And once the next step has been achieved, people are comfortable with black lives being taken here and there, whether it's by crazy, deluded black folks, like criminal black folks, or by the KKK, or by whatever oppressive regime. In their mind, they've been conditioned to feel alright with black folks being victimized. And to reverse this, there needs to be consequences. And those consequences have been since the George Floyd incident. The world cannot go back to how it was before this George Floyd incident. It's not going to happen. Too many people are awake. The spell has been broken. And now that the spell has been broken, everyone that benefited from this spell, so also that agreed with dumb black people, now things are backfiring on them. And you see this on social media, you see this in the media itself, you see this in the streets, things are backfiring. And I'm happy with that. No human being should have to be afraid walking outside because of their skin color. No human being's life should be threatened because of their skin color. I don't care if you're white, if you're black, if you're Chinese, if you are Arab, I don't care what your ethnicity or skin color is. If you have to be afraid in daily life because you might die very quickly or your life is not secured due to your skin color, something is wrong in that society. Something's wrong in that community and it needs to be addressed. And if it continues, then everyone in that society is guilty because they allow it to continue. And now, black people finally pushed back. And I'm happy with that. But this is just the beginning. I'm glad the beginning has happened. Black folks don't need any revolutionary figures anymore. We had enough of them in the 20th century. And truth being told, the baby boom generation of blacks, they did not honor those revolutionary figures because the baby boomer generation of blacks, they've invested in something called integration, which was doomed to fail from the start. Because the root of the white supremacy system was not dealt with, but they thought we can integrate. Bill Cosby was one of them that was thinking in terms of integration, and look at him now. In his old age, the white power structure turned on him. And I don't want to talk that much about the Bill Cosby case because I'm not saying that he's innocent because he's a devil worshipper. So of course, if you worship Satan, you're not innocent. Period. But it's quite weird that 40 years after sexual violence occurred, now you come out. And now suddenly all of them come out. It's a bit weird. And the timing is a bit too coincidental also. But that shows you. Black people had 2 generations that believed in this false hope of integration. And while the Obama presidency and the Trump presidency has revealed that this integration is not going to happen because injustice is not dealt with. So I'm glad that blacks have pushed back. Now, this video is not for solidarity, for Black Lives Matter, whatever. I'm just pointing something out to you. Blacks have finally did the right thing. Push back. And I want them to continue to press back. Because this was something you need to know about collective violence. Unless it's challenged, it will not stop. Unless it's challenged, it's not going to stop. Now, as believers, we have far superior ways to challenge it. Because we have the power of Christ. But even worldlings, without the power of Christ, they can stop collective violence. How? By exposing it, that's one. Exposing it, it disarms it. And after you exposed it and the violence continues, the violence will be self-destructive on the perpetrators. And that's what's going on with white supremacy at the moment. And in the world, they understand the following. Even worldlings understand this. Unless you challenge violence or you challenge evil, the evil continue in ease. And there was this pastor, this black pastor. I don't endorse him because he has some weird teachings that are against Christ. His name is Tony Smith. He's known for exposing black false teachers. Well, he doesn't really teach according to the word himself, but okay, that's another subject. But Tony Smith said this. I believe it was in 2013. It was a while back. He said, I haven't watched him for years. He said that the only way this violence against black folks is going to stop is when it costs the power structures something. When their businesses don't get any revenue, or when their societies are fracturing because of it. It's when it costs them, and the costs are too high, that they realize, okay, we need to change our attitude. So that has proven to be right. It's only when the costs became too high that the power structure realized, okay, we need to stop. And this brings me to the exodus of the Israelites in the Old Testament. Why did God bring 10 plagues on Egypt? Here's why. By systematically and persistently opposing and shutting down the violence of the Egyptians, the world experienced repercussions for allowing it to happen. Because Egypt governed the world. So when Egypt collapsed, the whole world's economy collapsed. So God brought ruin on those that ruined the Israelites. And the way it happened was that the world was resisting God's will. They did not want to leave the Israelites alone. So their resistance against God's will backfired on them in the form of 10 plagues. And eventually they had no choice but to let the Israelites go. And even then, they had this suicidal action of going after them anyway. And it was proven detrimental to them at the Red Sea. Once that has happened, and the Israelites were out of Egypt, the rest of the world was shocked, and nobody dared to attack the Israelites at that time. Now, there were 2 tribes, there were 2 groups that thought they could still try something. Those were the Edomites and the Amalekites, but both paid dearly for it later in history. So, if God would have gotten the Israelites out of Egypt without a fight, people still feel confident thinking they can do something. But because the violence was challenged at the expense of the perpetrators persistently, nobody even wanted to think about it anymore. And for a few generations, no one successfully challenged the Israelites. Now, when the Israelites were in the Promised Land, a few generations later, and they fell into idolatry, things happened. But even then, none of them even tried to exterminate the Israelites or think in such terms, because they knew if they cross a certain line, they'll be finished. So, the reason I've spoken about this situation of George Floyd and the consequence of it, because I want to point out to you that if you do not challenge evil properly and consistently and persistently, it will continue. And here's the best part of this whole George Floyd situation: nobody can brush it off. It affects everyone's life, and if you don't comply with justice, the violence will come to haunt you. But that's the thing with collective violence. Anyone that agrees with collective violence is part of a pact, a demonic pact. And as long as the victims are dying, there is relief. When the victims cannot be easily harmed anymore, everyone that is invested in that pact will have a backlash in their houses, wherever they are. That's how it goes in the paranormal. So there's a lot of backlash going on worldwide because of this George Floyd situation. And I'm happy with it, because it has to stop. And will stop. I know that the scapegoating of blacks will remain a theme until Christ returns, but anyway, I'm glad black folks did the right thing by challenging it persistently. Believers, I'm not telling you to agree with Black Lives Matter, with that group, because that group has its pagan origin. I'm not saying that all the black people that are protesting now have the right motive, but one thing you need to give them: they are persistent, consistent, and they are correct. Believers should be far more persistent and consistent than them. Be at peace.